So the number that we're dealing with is 13.3 million. There have been more than 13.3 million people here in the United States that have contracted COVID 19. And out of those 13.3 million, um, roughly 266,000 of them have died from COVID 19 and its complications. I personally know two people who have died. I personally know 29 people who have had COVID 19. Um, and as bleak as those numbers are, as bad as things sound, um, things are expected to get worse. And they're expected to get worse because of the season in which we find ourselves. You heard me during the intro mention how, hey, we were off for Wednesday and Friday of last week because of Thanksgiving. And if any of you watched the news over the weekend, you saw many, many, many Americans traveling during the holiday season. And I remember reading, matter of fact, last night when I was in the bed, I know it's a bad habit, but I was reading an article on my phone that I want to say it was the Biden administration, or soon to be Biden administration, referencing that, hey, those of you who went and saw your family and friends and got together on Thanksgiving, expect that some of you are going to find yourself in the ICU pretty soon in the next few weeks, next few days, right? It's pretty bleak, but in the words of our current COVID in chief, it is what it is because of the decisions some people have made, right? They made decisions to come out of isolation and expose themselves and others to this deadly contagion. And so, because of that, we find ourselves in a situation where obviously Thanksgiving was last Thursday. It will probably be a few more days, upwards of about a week, before the numbers we start seeing are a reflection of people who got exposed to COVID 19 and contracted COVID 19 due to their Thanksgiving interactions and Thanksgiving travels. But it's not just Thanksgiving that we have in the season, right? We have Christmas, we have New Year's. And because we have, quite frankly, three important and monumental periods for a lot of people, simply again, due to the season in which we find ourselves, I really don't know how else to say this other than the fact that like a really dark period is coming. And quite honestly, the question that I pose is, at what point do, look, in a lot of situations, we are dealing with grown adults, right? And you have grown adults who are actively making the decision to not just potentially harm themselves, but to harm others, right? At this point, you can't really use that, ignorance kind of. I mean, the information is out there. People are talking left and right about this thing. You can't say you didn't know or you don't know about COVID. You do know. But the question I posed is, what do we do at this point? I'm pretty sure some of you have heard the stories about nurses treating COVID patients who, while they are actively struggling to breathe, are like denying reality, saying, I don't have COVID, or, oh, this is just the flu, or, and they're gasping for air. At what point do we start saying, well, hey, maybe we need to bring mental health professionals into this conversation because people are completely detached from reality, right? People can have different opinions, but at a certain point, when people start operating from a point in which they have their own set of facts, and it contradicts reality, like you can't have rational conversations with people who are not willing to have a rational conversation with you, right? So what do we do about that? I mean, we are the land of freedom. And um, this land of freedom is one in which, people have fought for their freedoms. They've died for their freedoms, and some people consider um, they consider the ability to not wear a mask a freedom, as crazy to me as that sounds. But if people are viewing what is going on as kind of a thing about personal freedoms, how do you contend with that when their whole idea of America is built upon personal freedom, right? Personal freedom with a gun, personal freedom with your, vagina, personal freedom with your money, personal freedom. Like, personal freedom is the name of the game here. So how do we I don't know. I don't know. I think we're at a point where we really need to have some difficult conversations. But again, I think at a certain point, some of the people we need to ask to join us in those conversations need to be like mental health professionals, because we cannot have a rational conversation with people who are refusing to be rational. You're not going to get anywhere. We're going to tire ourselves out. They're going to, they say, you don't get in the mud with the pig because the pig is going to enjoy being in the mud. Well, you're basically not. That's not exactly what it says, but there's some sort of quote that says that. But, the people who are even like, my gosh, sorry, I thought I had that notification off. Even when you watch some of these videos that you catch online of people who, now I will openly say that no, I don't think that if you are not an employee of an organization, you should not be walking up to a stranger telling them to wear a mask. I have seen too many examples of I read an example of someone getting stabbed in the neck. I read an example of someone having a gun pulled on them after they left the building. So, if you're not an employee, I really don't advise you walking up to a stranger telling them, "Yo, put on a mask." But if you see some of those videos, and I want you to look at look in the eyes of the people who are refusing to wear a mask, the people who are being asked to put on a mask. I promise you, if you look in their faces, they literally they enjoy the confrontation. They want the confrontation. Quite frankly, some of them, I'm not convinced that they don't go out there actively seeking that conversation. Again, do not get in the mud with a pig, because you are going to find yourself dirty and the pig is the only one enjoying it. But so, anywho, reeling myself back to the time in which we find ourselves with Thanksgiving and with Christmas and with New Year's, a dark period is coming. So, what do we do about it? Right? Um, because it's not just a matter of people deciding, oh, I don't care if I get it because it's just the flu. Like, we're dealing with something that can hurt other people. Some people have it. They're walking around asymptomatic, not knowing that they have it, not knowing that they're a carrier, and they are killing someone's grandmother. They are killing someone's father. They are killing their brother, their sister, their neighbor, their mailman, right? They're killing these people unknowingly. So it's not just something that personally affects them. But then another kind of compounding factor or compounding issue with this is, especially if you've been reading articles or listening to the news fairly recently, there is a shortage of trained healthcare staff. And the staff that we have left, they are getting burned out. I don't think most people understand that, with the exception of like people who work in like trauma centers and stuff like that, most medical professionals, they're not having to put out fires, multiple fires a day. Like, even though they're trained to do it, that's quite frankly not what they signed up for. And these people are getting exposed to the virus. They're contracting the virus. Some of these people are dying from the virus. Um, And so again, we're seeing a shortage of medical staff. And there's not this endless supply of people who are trained to work in the medical field. So what do we do? I was in a forum online, and a gentleman was talking about his experience having contracted COVID. And he said that he literally would be in his room, and it would be 5 to 6 hours that he would go without seeing a nurse or anybody come into his room. And when you think about, I have a family member who was dealing with a very severe medical issue. And, you know, I came to know that um, medical professionals, especially when someone is admitted into the hospital, obviously they're not in there every second, but they do try and like around every hour, something depending on the severity of the issue that the person is dealing with, right? But 5 or 6 hours, especially when you're talking about something that really affects the person's respiratory issues, and this is someone who was having a problem breathing, who was receiving high flow oxygen through one of those cannula thingamajigs, and he didn't see anyone for 5 to 6 hours. Initially, when I read that, I was furious. I was like, how dare these people? How dare these people leave that man? But then I had to catch myself, and I had to say, you know what, Brittany? You can't be mad at them. These people, I do not feel for one moment that they intentionally left that man there. I think what they were contending with was a hospital full of patients. Some people out dealing with COVID. Some people probably did. And they just had to deal with the resources that they had available, resources including people. And they could only see that man every 5 to 6 hours. Now, if they actively made the choice not to see the man for 5 to 6 hours, that's absolutely deplorable. That's bad care, right? But I do not believe, especially with what I have come to see now. Obviously, you can't paint everybody with a good brush or a brush and say, "Oh, everyone's good, everyone's bad." But I think for the most part, medical professionals are not some, horrible people who are saying, "Oh, let me leave this man on oxygen in his room for 5 to 6 hours." I don't think that for a second. But anywho, so that's what we're dealing with. So where am I going with all of this, right? Because I have to be going somewhere, right? This show today is about Nancy Pelosi. We're coming up on the 11th of December. We are coming up on um, a point at which our government needs to, in so many words, be refunded, right? Like we need to authorize uh, funding for our government. Otherwise, if we don't, the government ceases to run. Now, obviously, certain things are going to continue, right? Like if you are on Social Security, so on and so forth, that stuff is going to continue. But other things are going to be affected. We had this happen a few months ago. And when this happened, a lot of people were saying, look, Nancy Pelosi should not agree to fund the government without getting stimulus passed. And I think in the case of now, she needs to stand her ground and not fund the government until some form of stimulus that directly aids the American people is passed. Now, I've said this before when I've mentioned this in previous episodes. Should she, in this moment, if she goes this route, should she say, say that 5 times fast, should she say, I am going to hold up until I get everything I want? Absolutely not. She just needs to kind of aim for the bare minimum that will be effective and efficient in this moment to carry us over until we get to the Biden administration. Last time, when this happened a few months ago, I really don't believe that Nancy Pelosi, especially when you consider the hopium that she was trying to sell people. And I think there was an element of, at a certain point, Nancy knew that we weren't going to see stimulus, but this happened so many months ago that I think that this was during a time where she genuinely was holding out and hoping that we were actually going to see a stimulus package passed. But I think she was operating under the assumption that when it comes to the other side, the Republicans, that they were acting in good faith and that they would eventually, well, let me go ahead and fund the government, and eventually the Republicans will come to the table and we'll be able to get a stimulus package passed. I do not believe at that time, again, that she genuinely didn't think that the Republicans were going to somehow work it out with her eventually. But where we are right now, Nancy Pelosi cannot operate in that same frame of mind. She has to be fully aware that Republicans are not acting in good faith. She has to be fully aware that she cannot hope and change her way to something actually being done. Nancy Pelosi cannot. Now, a lot of people will tell you she hasn't been playing nice, and I think that she has done a phenomenal job in some respects during this kind of entire negotiation thing that we've been seeing, right? If that's what we're going to call it. But in this respect, when it comes to assuming that the other side is going to play nice, Nancy Pelosi can't do that because that doesn't work. The best predictor of a person's future behavior is their past behavior. And their past behavior, the Republicans' past behavior is, give us what we want. We want to fund the government, and we don't want to do anything for you. She has got to hold her ground and say, I need the very minimal form of stimulus attached to this so we can get something to the American people if you want me to fund this government. Quite frankly, this is the equivalent of trying to bring a knife to a gunfight. You can't do that. Nancy Pelosi, for the American people, has to, she has to say, I am unwilling to fund the government on December 11th unless we get some minimal pieces of stimulus attached to this. I'm just not doing it. And as Americans, we need to be willing to support her. Because without this happening, we're not going to see anything until potentially January. And even then, it won't really be in effect probably for a month or two. So we're going to be at the end of quarter one of 2021. This is really our last and final opportunity to get a minimal amount of stimulus passed to hold us over. So we absolutely need this. We're depending on Nancy Pelosi. We're absolutely depending on it. And she has to be willing to do it by any means necessary.